Hi there, how's it going? Thank you so much for reaching out for a profile evaluation. I think there's some bad news and some good news. I think I'll start with the bad news. The bad news is that I don't think that this profile is a strongly competitive one for a lot of MBA programs. I do think that it's possible for you to get into an MBA program, but I think the good news is that I don't think you actually need an MBA, and I almost wonder if you perhaps even secretly don't want one. And the reason I say this is based on something you write at the very end of your profile review. So we will get to that in a second, but just just sort of a heads up, spoiler alert, it kind of sounds to me like maybe you don't want an MBA. Or perhaps some sort of alternative to the MBA might be a better fit for you, which, by the way, if that turns out to be the case, congratulations, I just saved you $200,000 because if you get into a top 2-year MBA program, in the United States at least, you would probably have to take out about $150,000 to $170,000 in student loans to pay for that degree, and there's also the opportunity cost, and there's also living expenses, and so if it turns out that perhaps after you dig a little bit more and you do a little bit more research, you discover that the MBA isn't actually what you need to get where you want to go, you can please send me a portion of the money I've sent you. I'm just kidding. You don't have to. But anyway, so let's talk a little bit about some of the things of this profile that I think are pretty challenging. Number one, age at matriculation, 39 years. Even if we subtracted 10 years from this and made you 29 years old, you would still be above, the average age for a lot of these programs. And of course it varies. I was at least heartened to see that you had some of the Canadian programs down here, and you had some of the European programs. So the good news is that the European programs and the Canadian programs do tend to skew a little bit more to older candidates. They are more open to older candidates. Their average ages do tend to be a smidge higher, but they're not 39 years higher, right? They tend to be more around the 30, 31 age range. So I think, I'm not sure exactly what happened. It's not entirely clear to me what you did with the first several years of your career, because when you talk to me about your experience, you only mention 9 years. You talk about 9 years in sales support at a consumer electronics company, and then for the past 1.5 years, you've been a freelance nutrition, kickboxing, fitness coach. So that sums to 10.5 years of experience. So does that mean that you started working at age 27 and a half? So I'm not really sure. If you did start working, let's say you did start working at age 27 and a half, which means that you graduated from college or from your first graduate program at that age, then you have a stronger shot. But if you graduated from college at around age 21, 22, and you actually have 18 years of work experience, and this is going to be a tough sell for the traditional 2-year program. And in fact, this isn't the 2-year programs being mean or being cruel or being snooty. It's just because you really, at age 39, like, I'm not that much, I'm older than you, but not like that much older than you. At age 39, you don't want to be in an MBA program, a full-time MBA program, surrounded by 26-year-olds who just go out drinking every night. Like, you're going to be surrounded by people who are in a very different place in their lives. Many of them are single, or if they are married, they're sort of newlyweds. Many of them don't have children yet. I don't know what your personal situation is, but these are folks who are at a very different place in their lives than the average sort of 39-year-old is. So even if you could get into a 2-year program, I'm not sure that I could advise you to really go, because I'm not sure that you'd have a great time. You'd be surrounded by all these young kids. Now, for you at your age, I think you should be exclusively focusing on 1-year programs. I think it's smart that you're looking to Europe and Canada, because I don't think a U.S. program will go for someone who's 38, 39 years old. So it's unlikely, I think it's unlikely that many programs will be open to you, but here's what I'm going to tell you. I think a lot of these programs that you mentioned down here that you're looking at, they do offer sort of pre-application consultations. So many of them actually say, if you go to their websites, they say something like, send us your CV and we'll give you an initial assessment. So if you, first of all, make sure that your CV is very good. Applicant Lab. I've got some free advice there you can go check out as part of my free trial. So you can go check out some of that. But just make sure that it's a one-page resume, that it's very clean, very easy to understand, very powerful, and submit it to some of these schools that do these pre-assessments, and they will tell you. Obviously, I will say take it with a grain of salt. The schools do tend to encourage people more than they tend to discourage people, because when you think about it from the school's perspective, it's in their best interest to look as elite as possible. So therefore, it's in their best interest to encourage as many people to apply as possible. So in my experience, if you do reach out to the admissions staff and say, hey, what are my chances? They are more likely to be positive, because they'd rather have people apply and then reject them. And then their admissions rate, like, wow, look, our admissions rate, we're so elite. But you might as well do it. I think I'm saving you also a lot of time and a lot of anguish, right? If a school says to you, like, look, we really don't think that a full-time MBA is for you. However, please consider our executive program, or please consider our online program. Those programs are a lot less work to get into usually. So I might, even if you do end up applying to business school, I might have just saved you a ton of time. In terms of having to, you might not have to retake the GMAT if it's not as competitive to get in. The essays might not be as anguish-inducing or anxiety-inducing. So, look, the overall story here, you like to powerlift. The fact that you were a powerlifting team captain at university, look, that was probably about 20 years ago, so not very relevant. I will say the silver lining about your age is that your GPA was low, and you went to a not elite school, which is another sort of mini strike against you. But there's good news about it. The good news is that when you're old, at least the older you are, the less your GPA matters. And at that point, the GMAT is just basically going to be primarily what they use to assess your academic readiness. So if your GMAT is below the average of the schools you're aiming for, then yes, I would encourage you to retake, should you do the research and determine that you still want to apply. Now, if this profile, if we ignore the chronological age, and if we just look at 9 years of sales support, managerial role in a consumer electronics industry, yeah, this might be an interesting profile for some of the, maybe an IMD or an HEC, especially if it is sort of a household name, a big company. IMD in particular really does like people from those multinational backgrounds who work for like big MNCs. So if it was for some sort of a multinational corporation, then this would have been great. But then here's where things sort of take a sharp left turn. You took 6 months off. Okay, great. Not great. Anything more than 3 months. Many schools will ask you to explain any periods of unemployment longer than 3 months. It is sort of seen as a negative when people take more than 3 months off of work, but sabbatical seems like a generous term because it sounds like you sort of quit. Sabbatical usually implies that you went back again, but here it sounds like you took the 6 month sabbatical and then you went directly into becoming a freelance nutrition, fitness, kickboxing coach. So it kind of doesn't sound like a sabbatical. It kind of sounds like you didn't have a job for 6 months. But anyway, you can explain that in the optional essay. I think, though, HNIs and provide personalized training and diet programs. Yeah, I mean, I think this is great. I think you probably have the potential to make a pretty decent living just being a personal trainer to high net worth individuals. So we'll get to that part in a minute. But the problem is this is going to be a tough sell for post-MBA employability, I think, because if you use the Career Vision module in Applicant Lab, and this is part of the free trial, in there I have the advice of where I talk about how, and I actually have this, I think, in one of my blog posts as well. I have a video called the AdCom's Hierarchy of Needs, where one of the things they really look at is post-MBA employability. So they're not just assessing your candidacy on its own merits. They're actually saying, okay, who's going to hire this guy after business school, right? Who, as we sort of scan and we think about who our corporate recruiters are, who's going to hire someone who spent 9 years in sales and then spent 1.5 years as a kickboxing coach, And I do think that it's possible. I just think it'll be tough, right? Because it doesn't fit neatly into one of the buckets that they are used to, right? So it's a tougher sell. I do wonder if, when I look at this profile, I think to myself, wow, this guy's good at selling and he's good at fitness. Like, should he start his own, fitness app company or fitness website? But you don't need an MBA for that. You could spend a fraction of the amount of money that you need to get an MBA and you could start it on your own. So, and you could probably take some sort of online class, how to launch an internet startup.com, right? There's probably, for a couple $100 US, there's probably some sort of course out there online for how to do this. Or you could even just buy Tim Ferriss's The 4-Hour Workweek, and then boom, there you go. I just saved you $200,000. Yay! High-fiving myself. So then here's where things get a little bit strange. And here's why I think you don't actually, perhaps deep down, maybe you don't really want this. You say, well, I want to get the MBA to get back into the consumer electronics industry. The problem is you left that field. You were in that field for 9 years, and 2 years ago you left it. So getting back into that field is going to be really difficult post-MBA, because you will have been out of what is a very fast-moving, consumer electronics is not a stagnant industry. It's not an industry that sort of sits back and not a whole lot changes in 2 years. No, it's a very dynamic, fast-moving industry. And so it's probably like in dog years, right? Where 2 years out of consumer electronics would be 14 years out for some other industry. So, it's really tough. So first of all, I'm like, okay, why does he want to go back to this field? You've had 2 years to go back, and yet you haven't. So as soon as I started reading this, I was like, well, okay, so maybe this person doesn't really want to go back. And then let's go back to the next section, down to this next section. So I started writing all this stuff of okay, the Canadian programs might do a pre-application. If you hadn't taken the 2 years off, maybe IMD might be open to it, but the self-employment in a non-business role, I guess maybe you could argue that as being, since you're self-employed, you're sort of being businessy because you have to market yourself and you have to manage your finances. I think it would be a stronger argument had you built a business where you had hired other coaches and built sort of a little empire of coaches. So I think it's a complicated story, right? I think your age complicates things. I think the untraditional career really complicates things. I do think that taking the 2 years off and becoming a kickboxing instructor, as much as, I think it's super cool, I'm not sure how an admissions committee would react to it. I think it's a little bit damaging. So here was, I was sort of feeling really bummed out about this profile. And then here is where you have this third point here that I think sort of undoes everything. You say, okay, I have recently been offered a role back in corporate, in the corporation, presumably the one you used to work for, as a product manager. The role is new to me and very attractive, and it's a great opportunity to restart your career in corporate. So right away, as soon as I read that, I was like, hallelujah. This is amazing. He doesn't need the MBA because he's already getting a product manager job. So many people go to MBA programs to get product manager jobs, and you're being offered what is usually considered to be a post-MBA role. They're offering it to you, and you don't even need the MBA to get that role. That's amazing. You should do that. You should absolutely do that. You should not even hesitate and not even, stop to think about it. But then, wait a second, you do stop to hesitate, and you write the following. I don't want to move back to corporate. And then you say, and you also wrote, I am skeptical about leaving my business, which I built from scratch and is doing quite well. If you truly had corporate blood running through your veins, if you truly were destined to be Mr. or Ms. Corporate, you wouldn't even be looking to business school right now, because you would have taken this job. You would have taken this job within 30 seconds of having been offered it. You would have said, oh, thank goodness, right? They're willing to overlook the fact that I left for 2 years. And not only that, they're offering me this plum assignment as a product manager, which is really such a cool role. I love product management, as you can tell, because I built a digital product that replaces traditional admissions consulting. So clearly I love digital products. So I think product management is super cool. This is the job people go to business school to get. So you have been offered a post-MBA position at a corporation, and instead of immediately jumping for it and saying, oh, thanking and, counting my blessings and thanking my lucky stars, you're like, well, I don't know. And so the fact that you're even hesitant, and part of it is that, well, because I don't want to give up my kickboxing business, my training business, that's really good evidence. So when I was in business school, I took an amazing class called Career Development and Self-Assessment. And, because a lot of us struggle with, like, what do I want to be when I grow up? And in that class, one of the things we talked a lot about that the professor was really keen on was this idea of evidence. Like, it might not be easy for us to immediately know exactly what we want to do with our lives. Trust me, I never imagined that I would be doing this for a living. And yet there's evidence. We get little clues along the way, right? Maybe it's a feeling, maybe it's a thought. But the fact to me that you even hesitated to take this corporate role as a product manager, that to me says that you shouldn't take it. That to me is evidence that you secretly deep down don't like being in corporate. And so this whole thing of, like, first of all, I want to get an MBA, I want to spend 2 years, I want to spend 1 to 2 years, I want to go, I don't know how much you would go into debt for a 1-year program in Canada, at least it's cheaper, right? But let's say it's, I don't know, $75,000. Let's say let's say it's about that much. Why are you going to go $75,000 into debt to then hope and pray and be desperately begging someone for a product manager job 2 years from now? A year from now, you'll enroll next year, and then a year later you'll graduate. So 2 years from now, you will be begging someone to give you the job that you've been offered right now. So why don't you take that job now? And or going even further, the skepticism in leaving my business, maybe that's evidence. Maybe that's evidence that your heart and soul are really in your business, and what you should be doing instead of spending time retaking the GMAT and writing a million essays and reaching out to 20 different admissions officers and trying to set up informational interviews, instead of trying to do all that, maybe instead you can find a much cheaper online course on how to grow your business, how to grow fitness businesses, creative ideas for the fitness industry, something like that, and grow your business, because this is clearly you love this, right? I wrote here, if your current job is doing well, and if it's what makes your soul sing, then keep doing that. And if right now you're like, well, it's not quite big enough, great. Try to find ways to grow it. I don't think you need an MBA to get there. The fact that you're not dying to take this corporate job is evidence to me. That's the evidence that, you don't need the MBA, period. And even if you were to get it, you shouldn't, because you're not dying to go back to corporate after all. So I just saved you $200,000. You're welcome. I'm sorry if this isn't what you wanted to hear, but I'm just being very ruthlessly pragmatic, because the thing I don't want you to do is to spend the next 3 months of your life stressing yourself to the max, retaking the GMAT, doing all this work, and then not getting into business school, or even worse, getting in, going into $100,000 in debt, let's call it that, after living expenses and travel and all that stuff, and then graduating and then saying, well, what do I do now? Oh, hopefully maybe someone will hire me as a product manager back in my old company. You could have that job today. So take it today. But either way, I don't think business school is something you should pursue. And that's just me trying to be more of a life coach than an MBA admissions coach. And for the record, it's in my best interest to try to, if I were doing this from a place of self-interest, it's absolutely in my best interest to convince you to apply to business school and convince you to purchase Applicant Lab to do so. So that's how you know that my motivations are pure here. Because by telling you not to get an MBA, I realize that I'm losing a potential sale. But my conscience won't let me do it. You gotta, I think you should skip the MBA completely. All right. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.